Mr. Abel sat in his sleek black car, the engine humming softly as he stared at the towering glass building in front of him. His name was on the top floor, Abel Enterprises. He had built it from nothing, and now the world saw him as a genius, a man of great success. Dressed in a crisp navy blue suit, he adjusted his gold watch, a symbol of his wealth. Everything in his life was perfect: money, cars, luxury vacations, and even people who admired and envied him. Women wanted him. Men wanted to be him. His house was a mansion with 10 rooms, a swimming pool, and a garage filled with expensive cars. But behind his charming smile and confident walk, there was something else. A secret buried so deep that no one, not his closest friends, not his employees, not even the women he spent nights with, had any idea about. This secret was the reason behind his success. It was the force that had shaped his life, given him everything, and yet, it was the one thing that could take it all away. As he stepped out of his car, the valet rushed to open the door. He nodded at the young man and walked inside. The elevator door slid open, and as he rode up to his office, he looked at his reflection in the mirror like walls. His face was calm, his expression unreadable, but deep inside, he could feel it, the weight of a secret pressing against his chest. No one could ever know. He smiled as his secretary, Lisa, greeted him. "Good morning, Mr. Abel." "Morning, Lisa," he replied smoothly. His voice was steady. His secret was safe. For now. Abel had traveled to Paris for an important business meeting when he met Lucia. She was breathtaking. Long dark hair, bright eyes, and a smile that could light up the darkest room. Unlike most women who were drawn to his wealth, Lucia didn't seem impressed by his money. She was intelligent, kind, and had a way of making him forget the weight of a secret. They spent the next few days together, talking about life, dreams, and things that had nothing to do with business. For the first time in a long while, Abel felt something real. He knew he wanted her in his life, so he pursued her, and soon they built a strong relationship that led to marriage. Their first year together was blissful. They traveled the world, held hands in the streets of Rome, and laughed over candlelit dinners in New York. Abel gave Lucia everything: a life of comfort, security, and love. But no matter how happy he seemed, his secret remained buried deep, hidden from the woman he loved. A year after their wedding, Lucia came rushing into his office, her face glowing with excitement. "Abel, I'm pregnant," she squealed, throwing her arms around him. Abel felt a strange mixture of happiness and fear. He kissed her forehead, holding her tightly. "That's amazing news, my love." Lucia was overjoyed. She spent her days preparing for the baby, decorating the nursery, reading baby books, and talking endlessly about the future. Abel watched her happiness with a quiet fear he couldn't explain. But then, 7 months later, everything changed. Lucia woke up one night with sharp pains. Abel rushed her to the hospital, his heart pounding. Hours passed, but the doctors' faces were grim. And then, the words that shattered her world: "I'm sorry, but you lost the baby." Lucia screamed, her body shaking with sobs. Abel held her, whispering words of comfort, but nothing could ease her pain. Days turned into weeks, and Lucia was never the same. She barely spoke, barely ate. She sat by the nursery, staring at the empty crib. Abel tried to comfort her. "We'll have another one, my love. I promise." But deep inside, a fear crept into his heart. He knew this was only the beginning. Lucia sat in the dimly lit bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The silence in the house was unbearable. Abel had tried everything to cheer her up, but nothing seemed to work. The pain of losing her baby still clung to her like a heavy shadow. Then, one morning, she felt it, a familiar wave of nausea. Her hands trembled as she picked up the pregnancy test. Minutes later, 2 pink lines appeared. She was pregnant again. Tears of joy streamed down her face as she rushed to tell Abel. This time, she would be extra careful. She changed her diet, avoided stress, and followed the doctor's instructions to the letter. Abel watched her closely, his heart torn between hope and fear. As the months passed, Lucia became more anxious. Every little cramp made her heart race. Every night, she whispered prayers, begging God to let her hold her baby this time. Then, exactly at 7 months, it happened again. She woke up with sharp pains, just like before. Abel rushed her to the hospital, his hands shaking as he drove. The doctors tried their best, but the nightmare repeated itself. Another loss, another empty crib. Lucia sat in the hospital bed, staring blankly at the wall. Her hands rested on her flat stomach as silent tears rolled down her cheeks. "What is wrong with me?" she whispered. "Is my womb cursed?" Abel held her hand, but he had no answers. Deep inside, his secret burned like fire. He knew something she didn't, something he had buried for years. And now, he feared, it was coming back to haunt him. Lucia's voice trembled as she clutched Abel's hand. Her eyes, swollen from crying, were filled with unbearable pain. "I want to carry my own baby," she whispered, her voice breaking. Abel felt something twist in his chest. He had faced tough business deals, fierce competitors, and high-risk investments, but nothing had ever made him feel this helpless. He wanted to promise her that everything would be fine, that one day she would hold her child in her arms. But how could he? He swallowed hard and stroked her hair. "We will, my love. We will," he said, though his heart pounded with guilt. Lucia turned away, staring at the white hospital walls. "Why does this keep happening?" she asked, more to herself than to him. "What if I can never have a child? What if I—" Abel placed a finger on her lips. "Don't say that," he said firmly. "You are my wife, and nothing will change that. We'll keep trying." Lucia nodded weakly, but deep inside, doubt gnawed at her. Something wasn't right. She had done everything correctly this time. Why did she keep losing her babies at exactly 7 months? Later that night, as Lucia slept, Abel sat by the hospital window, staring into the dark cityscape. His hands were clasped together, his mind troubled. He knew something she didn't. Something terrible. And if Lucia ever found out the truth, he feared he might lose more than just their unborn children. Abel stared at Lucia, his jaw tightening. The words she had just spoken felt like a knife to his chest. "Marry another woman," he repeated, his voice low, almost dangerous. Lucia looked at him with tired, pained eyes. "Abel, I love you. But if I can't give you children, what is the point?" She forced a weak smile, but her hands trembled. "You deserve to be a father." Abel shot up from the couch, pacing the room like a caged lion. "Lucia, don't ever say that again," he snapped. "I married you, not your ability to have children." Tears welled up in her eyes. "But you want children. Every man does." He clenched his fists. He did want children. He had imagined little feet running around the house, a tiny voice calling him daddy. But the problem was far more complicated than Lucia knew. Abel turned to her, his expression softer now. "Lucia, you are my wife. No one else." She exhaled shakily, nodding. But her heart was still heavy. She wanted to believe him, but deep inside, she felt like she was holding him back. That night, as Abel lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, his mind was in turmoil. He knew he had to do something before Lucia started digging too deep, because if she ever uncovered the truth behind their lost pregnancies, their marriage would never be the same again. Lucia sat in the living room, staring blankly at the wall. She had thought she was prepared for this, prepared to watch another woman carry her husband's child. But when Sonia announced her pregnancy, it had felt like a dagger to her heart. Still, she had forced a smile, congratulated them, and tried to be strong. Now, 5 months later, Sonia was glowing, her belly rounding as she carried Abel's child. The family had been overjoyed. Abel had been overjoyed. But then, like a cruel curse, history repeated itself. Lucia had been in the kitchen when she heard the scream. Rushing upstairs, she found Sonia curled up on the floor, sobbing in pain. Blood pooled beneath her. By the time they got to the hospital, it was too late. The baby was gone. Sonia was inconsolable, just like Lucia had been. She gripped Abel's shirt with trembling hands, her face pale and wet with tears. "Why?" she whispered. "Why is this happening?" Lucia stood at the doorway, her heart pounding. 3 women, 3 pregnancies, 3 losses. Something was very wrong. Abel's face was unreadable as he comforted Sonia, but Lucia saw it. The flicker of something in his eyes. Was it fear? Guilt? A cold shiver ran down her spine. Abel knew something. And whatever it was, it had taken away 3 innocent lives. Lucia sat on the couch, her fingers gripping the edge of her dress as she waited for Abel and Sonia to return from the hospital. Her heart pounded with unease. When the door finally opened, Abel stepped in first, his face blank. Sonia followed behind him, looking dazed. Lucia stood up. "What did the doctor say?" Sonia swallowed hard. "I'm fine. Nothing is wrong with me." Her voice trembled. "So why did I lose my baby?" Silence filled the room. Abel cleared his throat and forced a smile. "Maybe it was just stress. We'll try again." But Lucia wasn't convinced. She had heard those same words before, after her own losses. She watched her husband closely. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't even confused. He was too calm. That flicker in his eyes again. That same look he had when she lost her first baby. And the second. And the third. Something inside Lucia snapped. "Abel," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is there something you're not telling us?" Abel stiffened. "What do you mean?" Lucia took a deep breath. 3 pregnancies lost at exactly 7 months. That's not normal. Something is wrong. Sonia's eyes widened. She turned to Abel. "She's right. This isn't a coincidence." Abel looked between them, his jaw tightening. Then he let out a forced chuckle. "You're both overthinking things." "I would never." "No," Lucia cut in, stepping closer. "You would never. But maybe something else would." A heavy silence fell over the room. Abel's expression darkened, and for the first time, Lucia saw something she had never seen before. Fear. Abel gently reached for Lucia's hand, but she pulled away. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he kept his voice calm. "Lucia, talk to me. What's wrong?" Lucia sighed and looked down at her fingers, twisting them nervously. "Abel, something is not right. 3 babies. All gone at exactly 7 months. She turned to face him, her eyes sharp with suspicion. "First me, now Sonia. Don't you think that's strange?" Abel forced a chuckle. "Lucia, pregnancy loss happens sometimes. It's painful, but—" "No," she interrupted. "Not like this. Not 3 times. Not at the exact same stage." Abel's smile faltered. He glanced away for a moment, then took a deep breath. "You're overthinking things. Stressing yourself won't change anything." Lucia studied his face. He was too relaxed, too controlled. Her gut told her something was off. "Abel," she whispered, her voice trembling, "is there something you're not telling me?" Abel turned back to her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a small, almost sad smile formed on his lips. "Lucia, some things are better left unknown." A chill ran down her spine. She suddenly felt trapped, as if the walls of their beautiful bedroom were closing in on her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Abel stood up, his back to her. "Get some rest, Lucia." Then, without another word, he walked out of the room, leaving her with 1,000 unanswered questions and a growing sense of fear. Sonia buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as silent sobs racked her body. The room felt colder than usual, or maybe it was just the emptiness inside her. "Why me?" she whispered. "Who did I offend? What have I done to deserve this?" The excitement of carrying life inside her had been replaced by the unbearable pain of loss. She had been so careful, doing everything right. The doctors said she was fine, yet the pregnancy still ended the same way as Lucia's. A soft knock on the door startled her. She quickly wiped her tears as Abel stepped in. "Sonia," he said gently, closing the door behind him. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with anguish. "Abel, I don't understand. Why does this keep happening? Why can't I keep my baby?" Abel sighed and sat beside her on the bed, his face carefully blank. He reached for her hand, squeezing it lightly. "The doctor said you're fine, Sonia. Maybe it's just fate." "Fate," she repeated, her voice rising. "Abel, this is not normal. First Lucia, now me. Both at exactly 7 months. Something is wrong." Abel stiffened slightly, but he forced a smile. "Sonia, don't do this to yourself. Overthinking will only hurt you more." Sonia pulled her hand away. "You're too calm about this, Abel. Too unbothered." "Why?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Because I believe everything happens for a reason." Sonia's heart pounded. Something about his words sent a chill through her. "Abel," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Do you know something that I don't?" Abel stood up abruptly. "Get some rest, Sonia. You need it." And with that he walked out, leaving her with a storm of questions and a gnawing fear that she was trapped in something far more terrifying than she had ever imagined. The clock struck midnight. Inside his grand mansion, Mr. Abel stood before a large wooden chest, his hand steady as he unlatched it. Inside lay his secret, his truth. Slowly, he pulled out a long red robe embroidered with strange symbols. He draped it over his shoulders, his face void of emotion. From the chest, he retrieved a calabash. It was old, its surface covered in marks from rituals performed over the years. Candles of different colors flickered within it, their flames dancing as though they carried restless spirits. With quiet precision, he stepped into the dimly lit hallway. The house was silent. Everyone was asleep. No one knew. No one had ever known. His feet made no sound as he moved toward Sonia's room. The door creaked open slightly, and he slipped inside. Sonia lay on the bed, deep in sleep, one hand resting over her stomach as if protecting the life inside her. Mr. Abel's eyes darkened. He stepped closer, lifting the calabash. The flames inside it flared higher, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Slowly he began the ritual. He circled the calabash around Sonia's stomach. Once, twice, 3 times. His lips moved in silent chants, words that only the unseen forces could understand. 4, 5, 6. The air grew colder. 7. The flames dimmed for a second, then flickered violently. Abel's breathing remained calm. His work was done. Without a word, he turned and glided out of the room, disappearing into the darkness of his occultic chamber. The next morning, just as it had always happened, a piercing scream echoed through the house. Sonia had lost the pregnancy. Lucia sat on the couch, staring blankly at the diamond bracelet on her wrist. The sunlight from the large glass windows reflected off the gems, making them sparkle beautifully. It was one of the many gifts Mr. Abel had given her. Yet, none of them filled the emptiness in her heart. Across the room, Sonia sat quietly, running her fingers over the new car key in her palm. It was sleek, expensive, one of the latest models. She should have been excited. Any woman would be. But her heart felt heavy, burdened with a grief she couldn't understand. Mr. Abel walked into the living room, his face glowing with satisfaction. "My queens," he said with a broad smile. "I have another surprise for you both." Lucia and Sonia looked up at him, forcing small smiles. Abel handed Lucia an envelope. "A fully paid vacation to Paris," he announced. "You need to relax, take your mind off things." Lucia sighed, pressing the envelope to her lap. Paris sounded lovely, but what was the point? She had long stopped hoping. Sonia, too, received an envelope. "And for you a shopping spree in Dubai. Anything you want, just name it." Sonia swallowed hard. "Thank you," she murmured. Abel clapped his hands together. "You both have nothing to worry about. Children will come when God wants them to. For now, enjoy life. Smile." Lucia lowered her gaze. Sonia forced a nod. As Abel walked away, their eyes met. A silent understanding passed between them. All the wealth, all the gifts, yet they were drowning in sadness. And deep in their hearts, a question burned. Was this really God's doing? Lucia stood outside Sonia's bedroom door, knocking softly. "Sonia, please open the door," she pleaded. There was no response. Sonia had locked herself inside since the miscarriage. She refused to eat, refused to see anyone. It had been 3 days now. Lucia sighed, pressing her forehead against the door. She knew the pain Sonia was feeling. She had lived through it. The heartbreak, the endless nights of crying, the helplessness. But this time, something felt different. Mr. Abel stood in the hallway, his arms crossed. "Let her be," he said. "She'll come around." Lucia turned to him, her eyes filled with frustration. "She needs us now more than ever." Abel shook his head. "Some wounds take time to heal." Lucia clenched her fists. Something about his calmness unsettled her. He never seemed truly shaken by these losses. She turned back to the door. "Sonia, please, just let me in." From inside the room, there was a muffled sob. Then silence. Lucia's heart ached. She had to do something. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Something wasn't right. It wasn't normal to lose pregnancies at exactly 7 months. no matter how much medical care was given. Was this just a cruel twist of fate? Or was something else at play? A cold chill ran down her spine as a terrifying thought crept into her mind. What if this wasn't a coincidence? Sonia and Lucia exchanged confused glances. What does that mean, Pastor? Lucia asked, her voice trembling. The pastor looked at them with deep seriousness. Just do as I have said. When the time comes, you will understand. Sonia swallowed hard. She had already lost so much. Could she bear another heartbreak? But something inside her told her to trust the pastor's words. On the way home, they sat in silence. The car moved smoothly through the busy streets, but their minds were far away. Do you believe him? Sonia finally whispered. Lucia took a deep breath. I don't know, but what do we have to lose? Weeks passed, and Sonia found out she was pregnant again. This time, a strange feeling of both hope and fear gripped her heart. She followed all the medical instructions, prayed every night and waited. As the months passed, everything seemed fine. But deep inside, she dreaded the 7th month. Then it happened again. At exactly 7 months, on the final night of that month, Sonia woke up with a sharp pain in her stomach. Cold sweat covered her body. She grabbed the clock by her bedside. 1:55 a.m. Her eyes widened. 5 minutes to 2 a.m. The pastor's words echoed in her head. Without wasting a second, Sonia staggered out of bed and hurried to Lucia's room. She knocked softly. Lucia was already awake, as if she had been expecting her. Without a word, she opened the door and let Sonia in. Sonia lay down beside Lucia, her heart pounding. Then, at exactly 2 a.m., the door to Lucia's room creaked open, and what they saw made their blood run cold. Lucia's heart pounded as she rushed to where Sonia stood frozen at the doorway. What is it? She asked, her voice shaking. Sonia turned to her, eyes wide with horror. Look, she whispered. Lucia followed Sonia's gaze and immediately gasped, covering her mouth in shock. Mr. Abel stood in the center of the dimly lit room, dressed in his occultic robes. The burnt-out candles around him gave off a strange, smoky scent. But the most horrifying part was his stomach. It was swollen, round, and heavy like a pregnant woman's belly. Lucia felt her knees go weak. Abel, she called, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Abel clutched his stomach, groaning in pain. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he staggered, his eyes darting between his wives. What are you both doing here? He stammered, his voice laced with panic. Sonia took a step back, trembling. We saw everything, she whispered. The rituals, the calabash, you were the reason for our miscarriages. Lucia's hands balled into fists as anger and betrayal surged through her. Why, Abel? Why did you do this to us? Mr. Abel groaned again, his hands shaking as he touched his unnatural belly. No, this wasn't supposed to happen. His voice cracked in fear. Sonia's breathing was ragged. The pastor told us to watch. He knew something would happen. Lucia's eyes filled with tears. And now you're carrying the curse yourself, she said, her voice shaking. Whatever you did to us, it has turned against you. Mr. Abel let out a painful cry and fell to his knees, clutching his stomach as though something was growing inside him. Something unnatural. Sonia grabbed Lucia's arm. We need to leave, she whispered. But Lucia didn't move. She wanted answers. Abel, she said firmly, what exactly did you do? Mr. Abel looked up at them, his eyes filled with terror. I made a deal, he confessed. A deal to be rich, but in return, I had to sacrifice every child my wives carried. His voice broke as tears streamed down his face. But I never thought, never imagined, that it would come back to me like this. Lucia covered her mouth, trying to hold back her sobs. Sonia shook her head in disbelief. And now you are the one carrying the curse, she said coldly. Mr. Abel let out another agonizing groan. His belly seemed to stretch even more, as if something inside was demanding to come out. Lucia and Sonia exchanged terrified glances. Something unnatural was happening. Something that could change everything. Lucia's breath hitched as she took a step closer, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Mr. Abel, her strong, handsome husband, now looked like a distorted figure, his belly swollen like a heavily pregnant woman, his eyes bulging unnaturally, his once muscular arms and legs now thin like sticks. Sonia covered her mouth with both hands, her entire body trembling. This is not normal," she whispered. Lucia's hands trembled as she reached out, but she quickly pulled back, afraid to touch him. "Abel, what happened to you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Abel groaned in pain, his eyes rolling wildly.
I
don't know.
I
can't move," he stuttered. His voice was weak, filled with terror. Lucia's knees felt weak, but she forced herself to stay standing. "You do know, Abel," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "You did something terrible, and now the very thing you did to us is happening to you." Mr. Abel's breath came in short gasps. No, this can't be happening," he muttered, shaking his head in denial. "This was never supposed to, it was never meant for me." Sonia took a step forward, her eyes burning with fury. "But it is happening, Abel. You stole our children from us. You made us suffer. And now it's your turn." Lucia turned to Sonia, her eyes still filled with shock. "We need help. We need to do something." Sonia shook her head, stepping back. Help him. Lucia, after everything he did to us." Mr. Abel groaned louder, his swollen belly shifting unnaturally as if something inside was moving. His face contorted in fear and pain. Please don't leave me like this," he begged, tears streaming down his face. Lucia felt torn. He was her husband, the man she had loved, but he was also the reason she had lost everything. Sonia grabbed her arm. "Lucia, we need to go. We need to find the pastor." Lucia hesitated, looking back at Mr. Abel, whose eyes were now filled with sheer terror. "Don't leave me," he cried out. But deep down she knew this was only the beginning. Lucia and Sonia felt their legs shaking as they rushed into the pastor's office, their breaths ragged, their hearts pounding. "Pastor!" Sonia cried out, gripping the edge of his desk for support. "It has happened. We have seen the truth. We have seen why we kept losing our pregnancies." The pastor, who had been reading his Bible, slowly lifted his head, his eyes calm but piercing. "Sit down, my daughters," he said gently. Lucia shook her head, unable to sit. "Pastor, it's our own husband," she said, her voice breaking. "He's the one responsible." The pastor nodded knowingly as if he had expected this. "Tell me what happened," he said, leaning forward. Lucia and Sonia took turns explaining everything. Their husband's strange transformation, his swollen belly, the fear in his eyes, and the horrifying realization that he had been behind their suffering all these years. When they finished, the pastor sighed deeply and closed his Bible. "The evil that men do eventually returns to them," he said. "He has been sacrificing your pregnancies for his wealth. But now, the very thing he took from you has been placed upon him." Lucia wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "Pastor, what do we do now?" The pastor looked at both women, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Take your belongings and leave the marriage at once." Sonia gasped. "Leave?" Lucia's lips trembled. "But pastor, we are his wives. How can we just walk away?" The pastor shook his head firmly. "A man who can destroy his own children for wealth is not a husband but a curse. If you stay, your lives will be in danger. What if he finds a way to recover and seeks revenge? You must leave now." Tears welled up in Sonia's eyes. "But where do we go?" "God will provide," the pastor assured them. "But staying in that house is no longer an option. Take nothing that belongs to him except your personal belongings. His wealth is cursed. If you take anything tied to him, his affliction may follow you." Lucia and Sonia exchanged a long, sorrowful look. Their hearts ached, but deep down, they knew the pastor was right. Lucia wiped her eyes. "We have no choice, Sonia. We must leave before it's too late." Sonia clenched her fists, her tears falling freely. "Then let's go. We'll leave this chapter of our lives forever." The pastor held their hands and prayed, asking God to give them strength for what lay ahead. As they stepped out of the church, the weight of their decision pressed heavily on their hearts. They were about to walk away from the only life they had known. But would Abel let them go so easily? The sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Mr. Abel dragged his weak, disfigured body across the cold tiles of his driveway. His once strong legs could no longer hold him, and his swollen belly, round and heavy like a woman 9 months pregnant, made it impossible to stand. "Help! Somebody help me!" he gasped, his voice hoarse and desperate. His mansion, once the symbol of his power and wealth, now stood in ruins. The golden gates were rusted. The once beautiful garden was covered in thorns and dry leaves, and the mighty walls had crumbled as if eaten away by time overnight. His sleek, expensive cars, the ones he had so proudly bought for show, suddenly burst into flames, one after the other, sending thick black smoke into the sky. A few passers-by stopped to look at him, whispering among themselves. Some took out their phones to record the sight, but none stepped forward to help. "Is that not Mr. Abel?" someone murmured. "The rich businessman," another replied. "What happened to him? Who knows? Maybe the evil he did has come back for him." Mr. Abel clawed at the ground, his fingers bleeding as he tried to pull himself forward. His once handsome face was unrecognizable. His skin had turned pale, his eyes bulging like a frog's, his lips cracked from thirst. "Please help me," he sobbed. "I can pay. I have money." But his words were meaningless now. The very wealth he had sacrificed innocent lives for had turned to dust. His fortune had abandoned him. His power was gone. The sky rumbled, and a strong wind blew through the street, sending dust and leaves flying. Mr. Abel let out a final, broken cry before his body went still. His breathing stopped, his fingers twitched once, then nothing. The crowd gasped, "He's dead." A heavy silence fell over the place. The great Mr. Abel, the man who once controlled everything with his wealth, had died alone and helpless, with no one to mourn him. As the wind howled through the empty mansion, it was as if the spirits of the unborn children he had sacrificed had finally taken their revenge. What a sad end of Mr. Abel. What are your take-home on the story? Kindly drop them in the comment section. And if you are just watching for the first time, a lover of my channel, kindly support by subscribing to my channel. Please like my video. Share to everyone, as many as possible. Thank you for watching. Till we again, bye for now.